The Violence Killer. The epic war between good and violence. Controlling the Violence Killer himself, it's your job to vanquish violence by the only means known to humanity. Violence. Violence Killer has everything you'll ever need from a game. Guns, claws, blood, dinosaurs, ladies, and most importantly, violence. Okay, so jokes aside here, I really have no idea how the board meeting went back in the day here in Japan when they were trying to get Turok 2 to come over here. Of course, Turok 2 is famously known for its violence, and also it's infamously known in Japan as Violence Killer Turok New Generations. But how does this version of the Switch actually compare to your memories and dreams and what you remember from Turok 2? Danny from the Famicast here, and today we're taking a look at Turok 2 on the Nintendo Switch and taking a little peek into the Japanese release of the game on the Nintendo 64. Now, although I am indeed reviewing the Nintendo Switch version of Turok 2, I always like to share just a little bit about the Japan angle with games, if it is at all possible. So, as you know, Turok 2 was released in Japan as Violence Killer Turok New Generation. The game actually featured a full localization, including Japanese voice acting, on top of the whole new fun title that they came up with here too. Oddly enough, after even pouring through the instruction manual box, like all that type of stuff, the only mention of Violence Killer is just with the title. Everything else is just a faithfully localized version of the story. Publishing in Japan for Turok 2 was handled by a company called Gensoft, so over half a year after the North American release, Violence Killer was let loose in Japan on June 18th, 1999. It's pretty surprising that the game even saw a release at all, considering that first-person shooters, especially at the time, were not popular at all in Japan. Add to this the hyper-violence, and you have a recipe for a commercial disaster. Despite a somewhat favorable review from Famitsu, a 30 out of 40, the game didn't sell very well, moving only around 40,000 units when it was all said and done. Now, for the record, the first Turok didn't really fare much better, only selling about 50,000 units. As for this particular version of Turok 2 on the Switch, and the original port released earlier in 2019, both are currently not in the eShop in Japan at the time of this recording. So, as for the Switch version of the game, visually, Turok 2 stays pretty true to its roots, being quite a step up from the original game. The environments definitely look a lot sharper, character models look more fleshed out, and the weapons and weapon effects all look a lot more realistic. Animation here is also relatively smooth and pretty realistic, especially considering when this game was originally released. The new coat of HD paint here also really helps make the game feel a little bit more modern and fresh. Now, conversely, when it comes down to it, this is just an up-res Nintendo 64 game, but, for what it is, it still looks and runs pretty great. Controls are another area where Night Dive Studios nailed it here. So, similar to the visuals, the control scheme brings Turok 2 into the contemporary gaming sphere. It's quick, responsive, and it genuinely feels really great to play. Story, voice acting, presentation, all that stuff are also really top-notch here. Unlike its predecessor, Turok 2 is full of tons of cutscenes that really help bring the entire story together in ways that Turok 1 simply couldn't. While this is a pretty early example of enhanced storytelling in gaming, particularly in shooters, it works really well and helps to offer a more immersive experience. Level design and overall game design here are pretty decent, but you'll definitely notice that this feels like a game from a bygone era of shooters. And that's not a knock in the slightest on Night Dive Studios at all for their work on this port. It's incredibly faithful. So players hopping into the game for the first time might be a little bit disappointed by some of these gameplay aspects. So, on top of completing various objectives that you have to throughout each level, you'll also be tasked with tracking down keys that you'll need to open up levels as you go on. Now, most of these are hidden too, which sometimes makes backtracking something that you have to do. The backtracking, kind of like in other games of this era, really adds a lot more hours to your playtime, but it'll probably feel a lot like padding to most. Add to this that it's sometimes kind of easy to get lost. You might find yourself getting a little bit frustrated here at times. Turok 2 on the Switch is a very faithful port made for a contemporary audience. It has an interesting story, great controls, and, of course, lots of cool guns. Gamers looking for a blast from the past will feel right at home, but the game is definitely a product of its time. Objectively speaking here, being so faithful to the original game definitely makes the game show its age from a gameplay perspective. Now, regardless, Turok 2 on the Switch is worth looking into if you need some more shooters in your life. Final score for Turok 2 on the Nintendo Switch, 7.5 out of 10. As always, thanks for checking out this video. If you like what you see, please feel free to give us a like. If you are new to the channel, please feel free to subscribe. We got tons of podcasts, video reviews, and a whole lot more. Again, this is Danny from the Famicast. Thanks for watching, and we'll catch you later.
Violence killer.